This is Mill Reef, the horse Ian will always be associated with. Older brother Toby had Highland Wedding, Little Polvier, Cool Ground, Beach Road and the mighty Morley Street. And young Andrew has already bagged a big one, the Oaks at Epsom. It's time to meet the Baldings.
Morley Street goes on to win it at half.
Knocks on, clear by 5. Blocks on with the Abbey.
Phoenix Reach fighting hard, holding a half-length break, and Phoenix Reach gets the money half a length. Sight on goal second.
A dynasty of Baldings. Let's get to know them a bit better. Andrew, if I was to ask you to describe Ian in 2 words, what would you say?
2 words: meticulous, and God, what's the other one?
You're just showing off here with meticulous, aren't you?
Yeah, competitive would be a very good one.
Okay, meticulous, competitive. Ian, if I was to say to you, what's Toby like as a brother? What would you say in 2 words?
I would say generous to a degree, and
That's it, that'll do.
Generous and kind. He's a lovely brother.
Generous and kind. You can't get much better than that, Toby. If you would describe Ian and Andrew, what would you say about them?
Obviously talented. He's the luckiest little bugger ever looked through a bridle. Minder is Minder.
Well, we'll get on to Minder later on, but, you know, it's widely accepted that you think Ian Balding is one of the luckiest, dare we say it, buggers in the world. And this stems back very much to a university interview at one stage.
Well, that was sort of typical of the life he's lived, but, you know, we're all lucky. We're lucky that we're sat here, and we're lucky that we're in racing, and we're proud of what we've achieved. And, yeah. I mean, typical story. We both went to Marlborough. Our father died much too young, neglected to leave any money, but we had the most marvellous patron, which was Jock Whitney. And there was a sort of family get-together, decide what do we do with the boys? Well, by this stage, I already made my mind up that I was going to go training. And it was then, well, what are we going to do with Ian? Well, we'll educate him. And he'd managed, as both of us had, to do Marlborough and survive without having to do much work and certainly getting very little education. Anyway, it was decided that Ian should get educated, and Jack Meyer, Boss Meyer, who was very instrumental in both of our lives in the early stages of one, my career, and 2, his education, was instrumental in getting Ian an interview at Cambridge. And he goes for his interview and arrives to, I think he was called Pratt, was he not?
Dr. Pratt, yes.
Yes, Mr.
Very Dr. Pratt, very distinguished man.
Well, he sounds it.
He was indeed, and very shrewd judge that he was, because Ian walks into the interview, and as he walks through the door, this fella picks up an enormous great book and hurls it across the room, and Ian catches it and walks over and shakes his hand, and he said, "Yes," he said, "I think you're probably as good as Boss said you were."
Boss, by the way, was headmaster at Millfield.
Yes.
We neglected to say. It was he when I was at Millfield, really, which led that I had to go to Millfield to try and get into Cambridge, because I hadn't managed to get any A-levels at Marlborough.
Was that because you were thick, Ian, or was that because you just did no work? There's a very big difference there.
I think probably it was because I did very little work. I probably wasn't too bright either, but anyway, at Millfield, I went there in order to get some A-levels to get into Cambridge. And Boss, as we called him, or Jack Meyer, who was this wonderful headmaster at Millfield, sort of spoilt any chance I might have had by stupidly making me senior prefect in my second year, and then allowing me to go off riding whenever Toby wanted me to go. So, and of course, Toby managed to sell him a horse. So the highlight of everything at Millfield was one day when Milkshake, who was the horse that our great headmaster boss owned, won at Wincanton with his senior prefect aboard, and half the school there to watch. So that was great. And then he managed, as Toby said, to get me into Cambridge, still with no A-levels. And I think I was probably the last person to get into Cambridge University without an A-level to my name. Not something I'm proud of, but it was true.
There's more to that story than meets the eye, isn't there, though? Because wasn't Ian trying to get boss tips from you or something? And the boss, Jack Meyer, wasn't very satisfied with the selections that Ian was getting out of you.
To such a degree that Ian rings me and says, any chance that you can get boss and I tickets for Wincanton? It was Wincanton again, because it was our local track. And I said, well, I'm really looking forward to meeting this famous headmaster of yours. And of course, I'll meet you outside the members' entrance. And I walk out and I see Ian, and I see Ian with a tramp. And the tramp walks over to me and shakes my hand and says, call yourself an effing racehorse trainer. Unfortunately, I was never stuck for a word. I was always able, off of duck's back type conversation. I said, well, it's a matter of opinion, but as far as I'm concerned, they've run quite well, and I'm not displeased with how things are going, and the usual crap. We went on, and he said, well, Ian is continually coming into me and giving me these tips, and the consequence of that is that I have done my brains. And I said, uh-oh, I know what's happened here. I said, look, if you want information, ring me. And from that day on, I had the same sort of relationship as Ian was having with boss at the same time. And he was very, very important in our young lives.
Wonderful.
Because I was only 20. I held my first license when I was 3 days before my 21st birthday. And so people like he were very important to us and very instrumental in certainly in Ian's and my achievements, both equestrian and in life.
Running down now to the penultimate fence, and it's Bonanza Boy on the near side. Up and safely over from Ball Receiver, a good second over the road, and Four Tricks was down there. He wasn't in contention at the time, he was last but one. He's up on his feet all right, the jockey yet to rise, the rest are coming to the final fence. And it's Bonanza Boy over just first from Ball Receiver, who sprints up on the inside though, and Ball Receiver is finding the better turn of foot to quickly put daylight between himself and Bonanza Boy, who won it last year. So up towards the line, it's Ball Receiver and Jim Frost to win the Lesmo rehearsal chase.
You've talked about university, though, and A-levels and things like this, but how does that fit into the whole boarding plan? Because it was in, I think, 1945 that the boarding families emigrated to England. How did that happen? What's the history, Ian, of the boardings? Why are you trainers, and what went on in those days?
Well, our father, as you probably know, was the best English polo player of his generation. We were a polo family. That's what our father was. He is the last Englishman to have been a 10-goal player, which is the highest handicap you can achieve.
Horses were therefore, through the polo, very much part of family life. Would that be fair to say?
Oh yes, and Ian and I we spent most of our youth, our father was training at Bishop's Cannings through most of that period, and most of our life was spent racing one another on ponies that we managed to drive mad.
Yeah. But we were definitely sort of cheap labour for our father at a very early age,
right.
And he'd been cheap labour for his dad and uncle.
And I'm sure Andrew the same to his dad.
But you were all very much, Andrew, you've obviously grown up and heard the stories over the years. Horses was always going to be the family business, effectively?
Yeah, well, when I was growing up, obviously Dad was established leading flat trainer, and Uncle Tobes was the leading jump trainer. So it was very much, I didn't know much, although I did play a little polo myself. We didn't have the same contact with the polo ponies, but the racehorses were all around us. And when we went over to Five Hill on a weekend, which we did often, Fifield kitchen would be open, Cara would be there cooking, the parrot would be squawking, and we'd spend a lot of time over there. And it was a very different yard, Fifield, really, to here. It was Kingsley being a flat yard. It didn't really involve the kids very much. It was very much, you know, you can't go beyond this gate. Whereas Fifield was always much more of an open yard, with it being old geldings and everything. We used to go around and give the horses carrots and things. So we had exposure, Claire and I, to both yards at a young age, which was great, you know, and following both careers. I used to keep scrapbooks, you know, for during the winter Uncle Toby's horses and during the summer Dad's horses, and you're sort of at that age you're really into it, and there were some great horses.
Canascan just wandering off a straight line there, but jumps a second last, about a length in front of Sailor's Luck. Old Beach Road is running on in third, but it's Canascan with the advantage of a couple of lengths now as he comes down towards the last. But Gate jump by Sailor's Luck on the far side brings him right back into contention. Canascan on the stand side, Sailor's Luck falling back, and here comes Beach Road on the outside to take them both, and Beach Road gets out for a great win. Beach Road, Canascan is second.
They're racing now towards the final 12.5, and as they do so, it is on the near side, Book the Band alongside Dashing Blade and Wedding Bouquet, the filly on the inside. 3 in line clear of Pictorial, who's running on well, and inside the final furlong, Dashing Blade is the leader from Book the Band, Wedding Bouquet on the far side, and then Pictorial well inside the last furlong now, and it's Dashing Blade, the leader from Wedding Bouquet as they go to the line. Dashing Blade is one of the...
Well, I'm trying to establish it. It was in the blood, effectively. This was what was going to happen.
I mean, Ian and I weren't actually subject to it until we came back to England from America. I mean, while we were, well, you were only 6, I think, and I was however much older than you I am, 2 years. I was 7.5, 8, and we were dumped into an English prep school. But we hadn't had much to do with horses then, but from then on, yeehaw, it was all systems go.
Good use of that word.
And Andrew, of course, was Toby's amateur rider during the sort of years of AP.
And I distinctly remember this, that I was, Uncle Toby's always felt a bit sorry for me, because Dad always said, oh, the gormless boy, you know, he's useless, can't hit a cricket ball, can't do this, can't do that. And Toby said, no, I think he's going to be my first jockey. Do you want to be my first jockey? And I said, this was at the age of 7. I said, yes, please. So I signed a contract, and in it was a clause to say that if I was ever too heavy to be his first jockey, I had to be his minder. Obviously, being 11 stone at the age of 14, it was, you know, quizzing, and I had to be his minder. So I was called, well, minder probably from the age of 10, when it was obvious that I was going to be too heavy to be his first jockey. But he did still give me a few rides, actually.
And you rode a few winners.
Yeah.
As did Claire.
Yeah. Claire rode winners for Toby, and I did. I actually went and spent, and it was a great year when I left Cirencester, spent a year with Toby, and at the time AP was there, Barry Fenton, Emma Lavelle, Barney Clifford, there's a couple of others. It was a great time. And we had a lot of fun, and I always remember Dad telling me stories about his father used to love schooling horses, and that they, you know, almost simulate a race, and if one came down, that's what was expected in a schooling session. And Toby's schooling sessions were pretty special as well, because had this, and you've probably still got them, an array of dogs would jump out of the Jeep. So we'd drive up to the schooling ground, and these dogs would jump and they'd go in amongst the fences, and anyway, he'd go, right, let's go. So there was this one day, Barry Fenton was riding a horse called Fairbrother, I'll never forget it. And we go to set out, and Patsy, the little terrier, jumps out of the open ditch. Fairbrother sees her, goes through the wing, lands on his side, winded. Fenton's lying there going, I'm not going to get up until the horse gets up. So I pull up and I'm watching this, and Toby comes over, you effing idiot Irishman, what are you doing? You know, and the horses, and you know, Barry's sort of, I better not get up. The horse gets up, so Barry gets up. And the whole thing's so comical that I started laughing, and he turns to me and he goes, and what are you laughing at, you big ape? To think I'm related to you. Storms off. That was just pretty much standard practice on a schooling morning. I mean, they'd be going...
Well, I can imagine...
No, it was well organised. It was well organised.
And I can imagine that was more laughter than being taken seriously in many ways.
Oh, of course.
Smirking behind...
No, it was never a dull moment. And it was... I think if you're asking two words to describe Toby, would be, for me, good fun. And it was always good fun.